Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us today for our next edition of this WinMagic Speed webinar series. My name is Graham. I'm the marketing coordinator here at WinMagic, and I'm your host for today's webinar. I'm really excited, just as much as I am quite curious to see how passwordless can really make an impact on a business's bottom line. I'm, again, super excited to hear what you guys have to say today. So before we do that, though, I need to touch on a few details, just a couple logistics before we begin today's webinar. First of all, please drop any questions you guys have into the Q&A box below, conveniently also marked Q&A. We'll do our best to get to them today. If not, a WinMagic rep will reach out to you directly to answer you in our post-webinar follow-ups. Next, the webinar will be recorded and a link will be shared in our post-webinar follow-up emails. So again, mentioning that there. Don't worry, you'll get access to a recording. Finally, please fill out the survey at the end of the presentation so we can continue to use your feedback to deliver quality, relevant content. With that said, let's take a chance to meet today's panel and a group of esteemed gentlemen we've gathered for you guys today. In no particular order, we've got Michael Inglis, our CFO here at WinMagic, and a veteran of the industry with over 2 decades of experience. Next up, we've got Sujan Saha, our product manager here at WinMagic, and he's our passwordless guru. Now we've got Rahul Kumar, our VP of Marketing and Sales. He's an industry veteran with over 15 years of experience helping organizations secure their data. And finally, last but not least, we have the voice of the customer on the WinMagic. We've got the voice of the customer on the WinMagic teams, Lloyd Grimes, our customer success manager. With the niceties out of the way, let's get into the reason why we're all here today. Okay, so let's start with a really high level open-ended question. Mike, can you provide some unique insights as a CFO on the role that cost plays when considering an IT solution or a prospective vendor?
Well, thanks, Graham, and welcome everybody. I thought I'd share, a few experiences in looking at IT projects from the other side of the table. Before moving into the IT space, I spent quite a few years as a financial controller, working for a large multinational consumer products company. Now, every quarter, I was tasked with evaluating many IT projects, and those projects had to fight for scarce investment dollars. Those IT projects would have to compete against all kinds of other projects. It could include new machinery for new products, all the way to a new fleet of trucks. The approach we had to take was that all projects were ranked from top to bottom, and anything out of the top 20 projects was cut from the list, and they could try again in a later quarter. So we had to rank them, and the only really way to rank these projects objectively was to use good old financial measures such as ROI, time until payback, and cash flow. Okay. And to make the cut, your project had to be in the top 20 in terms of financial measures. You had to have a solid ROI, and that was the key to getting access to those dollars. And even if you were only in the top 20, would we consider non-financial criteria such as improved security, a better brand image, or improved market share? So, if my company's chief information security officer brought me a security project for my consideration, and it wasn't in the top 20, it would all likelihood be rejected, even if there were clear benefits from a security standpoint. At a minimum, some executive intervention would be needed to move it along. So a couple of other points to consider when you look at your project. I found that it was always a good idea to have a sense from your finance team about the minimum financial thresholds. For example, they could tell you that the project had to have a payback of less than 2 years, and that could really impact how you present your case. You might want to ensure your project has real, measurable benefits that were conservatively and realistically estimated. Many times, in security, you'll try and look at reducing your insurance premiums because you're reducing the risk because of your project. But I would only accept that if you're able to get a quote from your broker to help you support that reduced premium. Lastly, I like to see that your project acknowledge that if you're claiming efficiencies in time saved, not every hour of that time will mean an hour of additional value to the business. So again, be conservative in your assumptions, or you can expect to have some holes poked in them. I guess what I'm saying is that this is hard. WinMagic, we want to help you get into the top 20. We have a calculator available that, by answering a series of questions, we can provide you with those financial measures that will help you get your security project approved.
Awesome.
I think that kind of sums it up, Graham. Thanks.
Thanks. No, yeah, definitely. I think that's above and beyond what I was expecting in terms of an answer. So thank you very much. Before we go any further, I'd just like to throw up a poll, our first introductory poll of today's webinar. Okay, so we got poll 1, and then I'm going to launch the poll now. As you guys can see on screen, how does your organization view cost with respect to security? We've got 4 major options on screen. Please choose whichever one best fits how you guys view cost in this aspect. Just give you guys a few minutes. I noticed that we've got a few attendees from overseas, so thank you guys for taking the time out of your busy day. Looks like we're still got some answers trickling in through here. So just going to give a chance for some of the answers to come through. Okay, no more. Nope, some are trickling through. Okay, awesome. Alrighty, so we've had about 50 to 60% come through. Okay, that's good enough for the sake of the poll. Okay, so let's take a look at those results. So with the results you guys see on screen with regards to the poll, it's really clear that cost, even if it's not the primary motivator, is taken into account. So it's good to know that you guys really are considering your expenditures when it comes to evaluating a security product. Okay, with that said, let's take a look at the state of authentication, specifically the state of the market for authentication, narrowing in the role of the traditional password within it. I guess maybe Lloyd, this would be a good question for you. What have you been seeing on as far as this topic?
Thanks, Graham. And thank you everyone for attending. As we all know, traditional passwords have changed and evolved over time. So one of the things that you probably remember is that you probably only had to have like a simple sequence of numbers or letters to be able to have a password to access applications or even your email. Now the needs have changed greatly since then. So it's a combination, and it has to be complex combination, a sequence of alphanumeric and possibly a special symbol. And in most cases, it's 8 to 12 characters in length with regards to what you can use. Keeping in mind as well, and I've experienced this myself, you can't use the last 3 to 5 passwords when you're accessing any of those applications. So making sure that you're constantly changing that and moving that forward. And I was doing my own little research, Graham, and just kind of take a look at what others have actually found out. So published by NordPass in October 2020, the average adult has about 100 passwords that they have to remember to access any kind of applications or anything else that's out there. So I started thinking about this maybe a little bit from a security side and just did a little bit of a deep dive into an article by PC Mag back in April 2021. And they found that the average internet user is locked out of about 10 accounts per month. So things that they considered and actually polled on were how many people forget their password if they don't write it down. That number is 65%. And then out of that 65%, those polled, 57% of those will forget it once they've reset it. So a couple of pieces there, just understanding the business impact is they write it down, they put it on a sticky note, it's on the bottom of a laptop, whatever the case may be, not a great security situation. Business impact, typically a lot of calls going into the IT support desk. So that being in consideration, a couple of conversations I've had specifically with one WinMagic customer was 33% of the tickets that go into their IT support desk are actually password related or password reset related. So as we continue the discussion down here, I would like you guys just to think about how many of those go back into your own organization and what that impact looks like.
All right, thanks, Lloyd. Wow, yeah, you can definitely see that traditional passwords are starting to become a little bit of a problem, and I think that's a pretty hot topic these days in terms of the cybersecurity world. Now, Rahul, from a purely cost-focused perspective, can you give us a little bit of an idea that the impact that passwords can have on an enterprise's bottom line, say, for example?
Thanks, Graham. Sure. I think, yeah, it is important to talk about the cost. 64% of the respondents here said it's a definitive priority. So let me bring this back into what Lloyd talked about. 100 passwords, right? That's a lot of passwords and pretty much impractical for anybody to remember. No doubt users reuse their passwords, and and the passwords are phished, right? Even if 25 to 30% of these 100 passwords are for the corporate use, for their business applications, that's still too much, right? And it is expensive. For example, there are various data points which suggest that the cost of a password reset in the US is around $72 for each password reset. That's a lot of money there. There was an enterprise-wide study done by Forrester, which came back with a data point of $1 million that enterprises spend annually on password management alone. So that's again a huge amount of money going in there, right? Lloyd talked about one of our customers talking about a third of their resources, which can be equivalent to a third of their costs going, third of their IT support costs going into password management alone. But remember, these are all costs for management. We're not considering the cost that enterprises have to incur when it comes to a data breach, when they are subjected to a breach. And it's not a cost of a question of if, it's really a question of when. Now, 81% of all data breaches in the North American market arise out of phished password or stolen passwords. So that's a huge piece in there. If you look at the average cost of data breach, it's 4.24 million for 2021. And that's a staggering number. To sum it all up, I think every organization, when you look at cost as your definitive priority, you have to look at the cost under the three major categories. One, cost of management of passwords. The second one is cost of user experience, because that has to be very well defined. And third, the cost of the data breaches itself, right?
Okay, awesome. Thanks for taking the time to walk us through that. I think the step-by-step breakdown, at least for me, I know really, really helped right there. So now, Sujan, I think this question is probably best for you. Now that we've established an understanding of traditional passwords as well as their drawbacks, can you introduce passwordless tech for those of us that are still kind of unfamiliar with the whole concept of no password?
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Graham, and thank you everyone for joining. Rahul shared some scary numbers. Looks like because of passwords, companies are wasting a lot of money, millions of dollars. Anyway, before I talk about passwordless authentication technology, I'm curious to know how many of you use the same password for multiple sites. The reason I'm asking, I'll get back to it in a minute or so. So about passwordless authentication, it's nothing but a process of verifying users' identity with something other than a password. An authentication method that allows user to gain access to an application or a system without entering password. It's that simple. Now, passwordless authentication methodology mainly rely on public key cryptography infrastructure, where a public key is provided during the registration to the authenticating services. It can be any applications, websites, while the private key is kept on a user's device, such as laptop, phone, or even external security token, and can be only accessed by providing an authentication factor, such as local gesture, right? Now, these authentication factors are typically classified as something you have, something you are, or something you know. Something you have can be, for example, your laptop, cell phone, or external hardware token. And something you are factor can be biometrics, such as your face ID, your fingerprints, and so on. And something you know can be a PIN. Now, recently, in the market, people are looking at adaptive MFA. When you consider adaptive MFA, it can be like your IP address, your geolocation, your users' behavior pattern, and so on. So all this basically kind of like, passwordless authentication technology in a nutshell. Now, I'll go back to, some of the scary things that Rahul and Lloyd was talking about from a security perspective. So if we talk about passwordless authentication and security, let's have a look at some of the problem with having passwords. As you can see on the screen, for example, credential surfing, right? Attackers use stolen or leaked credentials from one account and then use the same information to access your another account. So that's why I asked you earlier, how many of you guys are using the same password? Because it's almost impossible to remember 20, 30 passwords. think about all these data breaches that Rahul was talking about. All these major companies, LinkedIn, Facebook, Yahoo, they had some sort of data breach within last couple of years, right? Now, if you use same credentials for your one of those data breached site, now for the same one for the bank, now you think about your financial ramification, right? So you're in trouble. Another one is like, phishing is, everybody knows phishing. We are familiar with it. Another common technique where attackers use bogus email or text message to trick a victim into replying with their credentials. So these are the common, pattern to get password. Now, you can see why eliminating passwords altogether actually reduce organization risk for a data breach. Because cybercriminals cannot steal passwords if you don't have passwords, and they cannot use them against you or your organization. Also, without passwords, it becomes much more difficult and expensive for attackers to gain access, right? I'll share one piece of info only. According to Verizon's 2021 data breach investigation report, 61% of data breaches involve the use of unauthorized credentials, right? So that's scary. Now, despite of the effort to increase security awareness inside organizations, strengthening policies around passwords, unfortunately, user continues to rely on poor and risky password practices. And on the flip side, if you look at the password authentication, there's no password involved. And passwordless authentication mechanism, they're using modern authentication methods, and they're highly secure. So if you're taking all this into consideration, now you can see with passwordless authentication mechanism, you can save your time, your resource, even your brand image.
Okay, awesome. Thanks, Sujan. I really appreciate you walking us through that. So now let's get into our rapid fire segment. I kind of teased the audience a little bit earlier about this, but so essentially how this works is I'll ask the panelists a question and they'll have a maximum of 45 seconds to respond. Whoever volunteers is essentially accepting this challenge. As of right now, our reigning champion is still Lloyd. Let's see if he can keep his title today. All right. So my first question for you guys is, can traditional MFA multi-factor authentication, using features such as push notifications, stack up to passwordless in terms of security?
Taking this one and going under 45. So as Sujan said before, the problem here lies with actually the reliance on a traditional password, the security of which is relatively negligible. In addition, passwords as a form of authentication are open to credential-focused attacks. Sujan mentioned those earlier. We can walk through those at a later date, but password authentication allows for MFA, but removes the password from the equation and all risks mentioned. So essentially you're being able to have the benefits of MFA without drastically improved security.
All right. Well, I can definitely say you came in at less than 45 seconds for that one. I think we're sitting around 35, 36, somewhere in there. Okay.
Good luck, gentlemen.
Tough
Good
to
job,
live
Lloyd.
up. All right. So the next rapid fire question I have for you guys is, with the device itself as a factor of authentication, is this really still considered MFA?
I'll take that, Graham. Fair question. So before I get into that, nowadays most computers have a built-in, trusted platform module, or TPM, we call it, which is basically a dedicated chip designed to secure the integrity of the device through integrated cryptographic key, right? So when you're using the device itself as an authentication factor, you can still use local gesture or biometric. For example, with our SecureDoc passwordless authentication, you can use TPM with local gesture.
Well done. Well done. You snuck that in. 43 seconds. Got a little timer running up in the nice corner. There we go. Look at that. We've got 2 champions today. I'm really happy about that one. Looks like you got someone challenging for your title, Lloyd. Got to keep that streak up going forward in the future. All righty. So let's continue on into the next segment of our panel discussion here. So Sujan, let's turn towards addressing our titular question. How can passwordless help you save on data security? And by all means, correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding is that passwordless can create savings from more than one value driver. If that is the case, let's take a look at each of these individually. So you mentioned that turning the device itself into a factor of authentication is possible. So how does that help an organization really save on IT security costs?
So if you're using the device itself as an authentication factor, you don't have to, pull up your phone and unlock the phone itself to complete the authentication. Same thing goes with hardware token, right? You don't have to plug your hardware token into the device and then complete the authentication and so on. Mm-hmm. Using the device itself, it's simply just convenient, secure, and saves a lot of money and time, of course, while you are actually getting exact, or if not better, user experience. So you don't have you don't need an extra device or anything else to be authenticated.
Okay.
Hey, Suzanne, quick question for you. I understand, that the basic benefit of having TPM, but nowadays almost everybody has a cell phone, and they would just use their phone as one of their authentication factors. So why not just do that? Why not just use the phone?
I totally agree with you, Mike, that a lot of people are using their phone as a MFA device. It's convenient, but it's an extra device or extra hardware that users need to carry, right? And personally, for me, I'm not sure how comfortable I'll be to use my personal phone for business use. So when I use the device itself as an authentication factor, why not take full advantage of it without worrying about not having the phone, or you have the phone, but phone is switched off, or your phone is offline.
One less thing to worry about.
Exactly.
Makes sense to me. So Sujan, Lloyd and Rahul mentioned the sheer volume of passwords for sites accessed by enterprise users a little bit earlier on. From a value driver perspective, can you clarify how passwordless kind of addresses this particular pain point?
Sure. So on average, from experience, most mid-sized organizations have 20 to 30 applications at least, if not more. Now, think about how hard it will be to remember those passwords for all these applications. And this is where I think passwordless authentication technology shines, right? With one single authentication, you get access to all these applications. And the best part is that you don't have to worry about remembering passwords at all. We all have like tons of things to take care of at work every day. And passwords should be the last thing we should be worried about. If not, we shouldn't worry about them at all. Even for IT admins, it's not easy to maintain. It's a complex process. Industry analysts say password management activities account for between 20 to 50% of help desk call. That's a lot of time wasted.
Okay, but so hold on. Circling back to password managers, nowadays a lot of people use those to remember those complex and lengthy passwords. So why bother?
Simple answer: cost, security, and user experience. If you're using password manager for business work, most probably there will be some sort of subscription fee or some sort of cost associated with it, right? But biggest problem with password manager is that the password themselves, you still have passwords under the cover, and many of the vulnerabilities and problems with passwords remain. There's still a shared secret with the application that you are using that can be stolen. And password still can get expired on the server side and have to be changed periodically. Now, most importantly, what if you forget the password, your master key for the password manager? You're in big trouble, right?
Fair point.
Fair point. Lloyd, you kind of beat me to that question. Damn, you're really on the ball today. Now, I know if I certainly lost access to my password manager, I would definitely be in a little bit of a pickle. But moving on, so Sujan, you mentioned earlier that this authentication option via a PIN, how does this really help contribute to an organization's savings?
So I think Lloyd mentioned earlier that passwords are complex 8, 12, 16 characters with alphanumeric characters with a special character and so on, which makes it harder for users to remember, especially if you need to remember multiple passwords, right? The idea of having 4 to 6 character PIN is simple. It's easy to remember, and it's only 4 to 6 character. And also it's actually being locally stored. It's not going to a server over the network or something like this, which means someone has to have access to your device physically.
Okay, I see.
If you're using PIN with devices TPM, it can still provide passwordless authentication to your applications and take advantage of all the benefits of passwordless authentication.
Okay.
And this, I find this interesting, Sujan.
Mhm.
What happens if I forget the PIN, the 4 to 6 character PIN that you're talking about?
Yeah, fair, Rahul. There are actually, many ways to address that. But for most, 4 to 6 characters are PIN are simple, right? I'm hoping that it's way easier to remember than passwords. But if user really need to retrieve them, there are a lot of ways, like they can use challenge response code, for example.
Okay.
Okay, that makes sense. All right. So, Michael, I got a hint before we went live today that you would have some sort of example scenario for us to kind of help illustrate some of the points that Sujan just made. Is it possible that you'd be able to walk us through this?
Yeah, sure, Graham. I'd love to put some numbers to this. So of course, I had to put a little example together. I'd like to show you how our password authentication solution can put real dollars in your pocket compared to an alternative. And what I chose in this case was hardware tokens. So on this slide, which I put together, you'll see a series of data points and assumptions for this fictional company. Here we have a mid-sized company with 2,000 employees that has a requirement to implement multi-factor authentication. We'll assume here that its current authentication process is limited to the use of complex passwords. Now, this company is considering adding a hardware token to act as its second factor in the authentication process for all 2,000 of its employees. They've negotiated a good deal for hardware tokens. They're going to pay $40 per token on a bulk purchase, and those tokens can be expected to last for 3 years. Now, about 5% of those tokens will need to be replaced every year. Now, in order to do their jobs, each employee in this company must maintain access to 15 websites that each require a complex password that must be changed 2 times a year. And each of those password updates takes them 2 minutes to complete. So just a little bit of time there, but it adds up. Also, our employees are typical humans who have trouble remembering all those complex passwords to authenticate to the network, and that on average, 15% of those passwords are forgotten at some point during the year, and all those passwords need to be reset. So in this example, what does it mean? Well, the use of our SecureDoc passwordless authentication, along with simple 4-character PIN, can lead to real measurable value for this company compared to the hardware complex password option. Over a 3-year period, this company can expect to generate net savings of $130,000, earn an ROI of 220% on its investment, with that investment being paid off in less than a year. So it can be compelling. To summarize, this value is really generated in 3 distinct ways. Number 1, you don't need to purchase all those expensive hardware tokens at all. Number 2, your employees don't waste time having to manage complex passwords for those websites they needed for work. And number 3, your employees, both the users and the admins, don't have to waste time resetting passwords because they're using a simple 4-character PIN. So we will be pleased to go through this in detail with you and use our calculator with specific assumptions that reflect your business so we can show you the value that passwordless authentication can generate for you. And remember, this value is all on top of the security benefits and the sheer convenience of not having a password. That kind of sums it up, Graham.
All right. Thank you for taking the time to walk us through that. I really like that wrap up little portion you gave there. That really kind of helped tie it in for me. Now, okay, so it looks like we're really approaching our 30-minute window here. So let's get into our Q&A, get a chance to answer some of these audience questions that have come in while we've been going through our panel discussion here. So in no particular order, let's start by addressing this question first. Okay, so this is coming from Kevin, and from a security perspective, why turn the device into a factor of authentication rather than use another device such as a phone?
Let me take that, and in the interest of time, I'll be quick. From a security perspective, turning a device into a factor of authentication is like by leveraging the security device within the device, like a TPM, is as secure as using a phone, if not more, right? And take into account no hassles that come with management of the phone or the cost of owning and replacing hardware tokens. It makes it a great option and also puts dollar back into your pocket.
That's what I like to hear. I don't know about you guys. All righty. Okay, so Now, this next question here looks like it's coming in from a Melissa, and my organization has a compliance requirement for MFA, multi-factor authentication. Would opting for a passwordless solution satisfy some of those elements? I think they're trying to get to the point of checking off a box for compliance reasons.
I'll take the Graham. Simple answer is yes. If you're using passwordless authentication, you'll be using some sort of multi-factor authentication. So yes.
Okay, great. Now, okay, so we've already passed the 30-minute mark, so we're going to take one last final question here, and it's coming in. Okay, can you reiterate why I should care about an ROI on a security product?
Yeah, maybe I should take that one, Graham. You know, it's really pretty simple. You know, investment in IT can be a tough sell to your company, even if it's a security project. You know, companies, they only have so many dollars to invest and only so much capital budget. And security projects have to compete against other projects that can be shinier, more glamorous, you know, have more obvious benefits like new revenue streams. But if you have a compelling ROI on your next project, that will help level the playing field for you. And security experts will be able to compete with all those other projects.
Okay, all right, thank you. And I can see here that most of you guys stayed in through the extra time. We've been running a little bit behind here, so awesome. And I've seen another question coming in here. Can we get the presenter email for contact information? Definitely, we can set that up. We'll set that up on a one-on-one basis, so no worries. Okay, so now just to address some closing remarks, and thank you guys for coming. Those were some great questions. Thank you for taking the time to ask them. As we approach the conclusion of today, just want to thank all of you for attending, as I've just said. Now, those of you that attended from overseas, thank you for attending outside of the normal business hours timetable. We really, really appreciate the fact that you guys took the time from your busy schedules. We look forward to seeing you at the next edition of the Speed webinar series, where our encryption experts will be taking a look at the hidden effects of using native encryption. Now, before we wrap things up, as Mike alluded to, please reach out to sales@winmagic.com if you're interested in a free evaluation of how your organization can save in time and resources by going passwordless. I personally know a few reps that would be very happy and willing to set something up for a time that would work for you. Until next time, these are your WinMagic authentication experts signing off.
Thanks very much.
Yeah. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Graham.